Chapter 23:17 Untitled. Chapter 23:17 Untitled. She rose to her feet and glared at Elder Grain. Has your brain gone rusty after living here in seclusion for so long? Why are you arguing with me? Give her a test and you'll see. Elder Jing said, That's right. We'll know after we test her. He rose to his feet. Wait. Elder Grain threw a dirty look at Chowga and stopped Elder Jing. I should be the one to test her. What if you go easy on her? Elder Jing snapped, Who do you think I am? Why would I do such a thing? Even if I wanted to do that, wouldn't you see through my tricks right away? Elder Grain said grumpily, I don't care. It has to be me. Elder Jing said, Go ahead, but you'll have to answer to me if you injure her on purpose. Elder Grain grunted and left the courtyard. Feng Wu was still solving the formation. There was a desert, followed by fog and then a maze. It was incredible. She found them very messy. There was no reasonable order at all. In the courtyard, Elder Jing asked Chowga, Why has she stopped in the maze? She's frowning. Does she know how to get in? After the maze was the core area of the formation, which was also where this courtyard was. Elder Jing was worried that Feng Wu would be stopped at the last step. Chowga wasn't worried at all. There's no need to panic. Chowga wasn't intimidated by the elders. She said confidently, Xiao Wu is amazing. I've never seen a formation that she can't solve. Elder Jing asked, Then why has she stopped? Chowga said, I think she's calculating. Elder Jing didn't mind the way Chowga spoke to him. The two of them sat next to the well and watched eagerly. He asked, Calculating? Chowga said matter-of-factly, That's right. Xiao Wu is the smartest person I know. She never forgets anything and has great deductive abilities. She's definitely deducing the formation in the maze now. Once she's done, she'll walk through it like she's taking a stroll in her back garden. Elder Jing was shocked. Can she deduce it before even going in? Chowga said, That's right. Isn't that what other formation masters do? Feng Wu was the only formation master Chowga had met so far, and she thought that all formation masters were like her. Elder Jing said, Of course not. Grain is a formation master as well, and that formation is his great work. He has never deduced a formation setup before entering it. He always does it as he walks around. Not only him, but all other formation masters are like that as well. Chowga said, I see. That means that Xiao Wu is the best. Elder Jing said, If she really can do that, she's got an amazing brain. Becoming a level 8 formation master won't be a problem for her. Chowga said, Xiao Wu is going to become a sacred formation master one day. Level 8 is nothing to her. Chapter 23:18 Untitled. Chapter 23:18 Untitled. After level 8 was level 9, and only after that could one reach the sacred stage. The Junwu Empire didn't have a sacred formation master at the moment. You're dreaming, said Elder Jing grumpily. Chowga clenched her fists in frustration. You'll see. Xiao Wu is the best. Look. Elder Jing pointed at the well. Grain is there. Gosh, what's he doing? Why is he trying to sneak up on her? That's just so low. Elder Jing and Chowga could clearly see what was going on. Elder Breeze had been cultivating, and he was speechless when he opened his eyes. Elder Jing was behaving like a little boy. He seemed to have forgotten that he was an elder. Chowga and Elder Jing got along surprisingly well. The two of them chatted like a pair of kids. Seeing that Elder Grain had hidden in the shadows, Chowga clenched her fists as well, but she had confidence in Feng Wu. Don't worry. He won't be Xiao Wu's match. Chowga laughed inwardly. Luckily, she had told Elder Grain that Feng Wu was a level 7 spiritual lord. Because of that, he could only exert the power of a level 7 spiritual lord. Being a level 9 spiritual lord, Feng Wu would have no problem defeating him. Meanwhile, in the maze, After her deduction, Feng Wu figured out the way in and out of the maze. She then walked inside as if she was strolling through a garden. Suddenly, she noticed something. There was a dark shadow behind a statue to her left. Was there an assassin? She blamed herself for being too careless. Looking around, she smiled. She decided to trap the assassin in the maze. She quickly hid in the shadows as well. Elder Grain had wanted to take Feng Wu by surprise, but he didn't expect her to react so quickly. He convinced himself that she had only hidden behind the statue out of sheer luck. He decided that he would stay hidden and wait for the girl to come out. What he didn't know was that Feng Wu had turned things to her advantage. What's she doing? Elder Jing saw that Feng Wu had gotten busy. Not only was she carrying stones around, she was also quickly writing things on them. Chowga indeed knew Feng Wu well. She could guess what Feng Wu was doing. If I'm right, Xiao Wu is modifying the formation settings now, said Chowga. What? Elder Jing was astonished. Although formations weren't his forte, he had heard enough from Elder Grain to know how they worked. He said, "It's much harder to alter someone else's formation than to create one. Are you sure about that? Is the girl really a better formation master than Grain?" Chowga was very confident. "I'm sure of it. Xiao Wu is the best. Your friend isn't her match." Chapter 23:19 Untitled. Chapter 23:19 Untitled. Elder Breeze looked up at the sky. He was amazed by how talented the youngsters were nowadays. Elder Jing had lived here since he was little and knew nothing about complicated human relationship. Therefore, he didn't find Chowga's tone offensive at all. He only asked, "Are you sure?" Chowga said, "Didn't you say that Elder Grain was the one who set up this formation?" Elder Jing said, "That's right." Chowga said, "Well, today is his unlucky day. His work is going to backfire on him." Elder Jing didn't believe her. Feng Wu was only a teenager, but Elder Grain was so experienced. Hence, he shook his head. But he was soon proved wrong. After Feng Wu finished writing the inscriptions, she smiled and went to the statue where Elder Grain was hiding. The old man had no idea that Feng Wu was behind him. After altering the formation, the maze was under Feng Wu's control. Therefore, she could see Elder Grain, but he couldn't see her. "What are you looking at?" She patted him on the shoulder. "Gosh!" Elder Grain jumped in fright. He turned around and looked at the girl in disbelief. Because he was dressed in black from head to toe, Feng Wu punched him in the face without hesitation. Thump! It almost broke his nose. "You!" Before he could react, Feng Wu shouted, "How dare you take Chowga away?" "It's not like that," Elder Grain wanted to explain. Feng Wu was ready for battle. Ground control. Fallen star swordplay. Freeze. Feng Tutu, Little Phoenix, come out. She was attacking the old man with every stance she knew. Elder Grain didn't take her seriously at first, and even Elder Jing only thought that the girl had reacted unbelievably fast. However, when Feng Wu started attacking Elder Grain, ouch! Despite being a spiritual king, Elder Grain was caught off guard. Elder Jing watched in disbelief. "Are you sure that she's only a level 7 spiritual lord?" He looked at Chowga in disbelief. Chowga scratched her head. "Maybe she's outperforming herself." Elder Jing said, "Don't you try to fool me. That wouldn't enable her to exert the power of a spiritual king." Chowga's eyes twinkled. "What did you say? A spiritual king?" "OMG," Elder Jing said grumpily, "a level 1 spiritual king at most. Why are you so excited?" Chowga said, "She's the future of your clan. She's not 14 yet, and she can already fight like a level 1 spiritual king." She gave Elder Jing a nudge. Hearing that, Elder Jing looked stunned. Even Elder Breeze, who had looked quite indifferent, seemed shocked as well. Chapter 23:20 Untitled. Chapter 23:20 Untitled. Elder Jing looked at Elder Breeze. Elder Breeze looked back at him. The future of the Feng clan. The strange silence scared Chowga. She looked at them and didn't dare say a word. Ah! Elder Jing suddenly cried out. Before Chowga realized it, he had dashed off. Ah! The wind he kicked up almost blew Chowga away. She had to struggle very hard to steady herself. Why is he so excited? Chowga asked Elder Breeze. Elder Breeze smiled so brightly that he looked 10 years younger. The look he gave Chowga was also much kinder. The Feng clan is going to rise again. He looked up at the sky and murmured. Chowga rolled her eyes at him. It was only because these people didn't know that Feng Wu had always been this amazing. Meanwhile, in the maze, Feng Wu's bombardment had taken Elder Grain by surprise. He was perplexed at first, but he was much more capable than Feng Wu, so he was infuriated after he realized what had happened. He had forgotten what he had promised Elder Jing. No level 7 spiritual elder could fight like this. Seeing that the man in black was furious, Feng Wu immediately started running. She knew that she wasn't his match. Luckily, after her modification, she could use some of the functions of the maze. It would delay the man a little, and she could use the time to get away. Feng Wu ran, and Elder Grain ran after her. Stop right there! He then stepped on something slippery and almost lost his footing. A bucket of water then poured down on him at that moment. He was soaking wet. He shouted in frustration, "Damn you! Stop running!" Of course Feng Wu wouldn't do that. Soon, she was out of sight. Elder Grain fumed. He wanted to control the maze, but it no longer followed his orders. Not only wouldn't it help him, it was also getting in his way all the time. However, he was far more capable than Feng Wu, and he caught up to her in no time. He was determined to catch her, even if he would be injured in the process. But something happened the moment before he caught her. Grain! Stop it! Jing showed up and blocked his way. It's none of your business, Jing. Get out of my way. Grain, I have great news. What great news? Let's go back to the courtyard. We can talk there, said Elder Jing. Elder Jing was ranked higher than Elder Grain and was able to stop him. He then turned to look at Feng Wu, his eyes so bright that it gave Feng Wu the creep. Are you looking for a girl of your age? He grinned at Feng Wu. Feng Wu met him before when she was little, and she recognized his face. She nodded and asked, Are you Elder Jing? Chapter 23-21, Untitled. Chapter 23-21, Untitled. Feng Wu had only been 3 or 4 when she was tested, and children of that age usually couldn't remember much. Elder Jing was thrilled when he saw that Feng Wu still remembered him. He nodded in excitement. That's right. I didn't expect you to remember me. You have an excellent memory. He led Feng Wu and Elder Grain toward the courtyard as he spoke. Elder Grain threw off his hand grumpily. Elder Jing didn't have time for Elder Grain. He only cared about Feng Wu now. There were tears of excitement in his eyes. Feng Wu looked at Chowga in confusion, but Chowga only shrugged. Elder Jing introduced the other 2 elders to Feng Wu. This is Elder Breeze, our leader. I'm the second in seniority, and this is Elder Grain. He's kind of mean, so just ignore him. Elder Grain didn't like the sound of that. Why should he be ignored? And why did Jing care about Feng Wu so much? Elder Grain said, Hey Jing, what's the matter with you? This girl is so vile. Didn't they say that they want to kick her out of the clan? I agree. Feng Wu frowned. They? Was that Feng Yanfeng's idea? Elder Jing snapped. No, we're not doing that. Why would we? Have you lost your mind? Elder Grain flared up. Jing, what's the matter with you? Didn't we agree? She's wounded me. Of course we're kicking her out. Elder Jing bellowed. You idiot! Have you ever met such a talented girl? Elder Grain felt wronged. But she wounded me. That's against the rules. Elder Jing said, What does that mean? It means that she's talented. Although she broke some rules, she exerted the power of a level 1 spiritual king. And she's not even 14 yet. But, Elder Grain wanted to say something, but what Elder Grain said surprised him. He said, her true capability is only a level 9 spiritual lord. She's cheating. Elder Jing glared at him. Even if that's the case, she's still amazing. She's not 14 yet. Elder Grain was speechless. Elder Jing said, and she solved and modified your formation. Grain, isn't that amazing? Elder Grain growled, shut up. Elder Jing said, you're an older man and she's barely 14. The mention of Feng Wu's age was like a spell. Elder Grain almost felt dizzy. He tried to refute it, but failed. She wasn't 14 yet, but she could fight like a level 1 spiritual king. Plus, she was a level 7 formation master. She knows inscriptions as well. She can draw them much faster than you can. It takes you forever to finish one, Elder Jing complained. Chapter 23-22, Untitled. Chapter 23-22, Untitled. Elder Grain's face turned scarlet red. Shut up and show me some respect. Seeing the two of them bicker like little kids, Feng Wu and Chaoga exchanged looks. How childish. Elder Jing knew that his old friend was genuinely frustrated, so he decided to leave him alone. Instead, he turned to Feng Wu and started showering her with compliments. Elder Grain didn't like the sound of it at all. Because no matter what Elder Jing said, he would compare Feng Wu with Elder Grain. So what if she's talented and capable? If she's a bad person, nothing counts. Elder Grain grunted. A vile, ill-behaved girl like her doesn't deserve to inherit the Feng clan. I won't have it. He then turned to leave. Wait. Feng Wu frowned. I'm fine with you not liking me, but please tell me why are you saying those things about me? Technically speaking, Elder Jing and Elder Grain were brought up by Elder Breeze and had spent their whole lives in this restricted area. They were as naive as kids and would always speak their minds. Elder Grain glared at Feng Wu. Because that's what you are. Feng Wu asked, give me some examples then. Elder Jing and Chaoga wanted to help Feng Wu, but she stopped them. She had never lost an argument before. She sat down in front of Elder Grain and calmly looked at him. Elder Grain immediately felt that he was already losing ground. He wasn't going to give up like this. He also grabbed a chair and sat down opposite Feng Wu. Fine, if you want to humiliate yourself, I'll give you that chance. Elder Grain snorted. First of all, we're told that your arrogance has brought you many enemies, and it'll bring danger to the Feng clan. Isn't that true? Feng Wu asked, for example, what enemy? Elder Grain looked at the list Feng Yanfeng had given them and said, the Zhuo family. Feng Wu smirked. Then do you know that the Zhuo family was the one who destroyed my cultivation ability back then? Those words shocked all the elders. They stared at Feng Wu in disbelief and said, how can that be? Feng Wu had just happened to record Zhuo Qingxian's speech with the spiritual fossil stone. He had talked about how they had destroyed Feng Wu's cultivation ability. Feng Wu had yet to find a chance to show it to anyone, and now, the three elders would be her witnesses. When they watched it, time seemed to freeze. Elder Jing was the first to react. He punched Elder Grain and said, I knew it. I told you that there was something strange about the incident, but you stopped me from looking into it. Elder Grain looked rather guilty. Elder Breeze's face remained expressionless, and no one knew what he was thinking. Feng Wu looked at Elder Grain. So, what's next? Chapter 23-23, Untitled. Chapter 23-23, Untitled. Elder Grain looked at Elder Jing and hesitated. Elder Jing snorted. If you have doubts, ask her. He had to make sure that Elder Grain accepted Feng Wu wholeheartedly. Otherwise, there would still be more trouble in the future. Next question. Elder Grain looked at Feng Wu. You don't care about your family members at all. You killed your cousin Feng Lu and cut off your aunt's hand. That's unacceptable. What do you have to say to that? Feng Wu smiled. Elder Grain glared at her. How can you be smiling? Feng Wu said, You'll know the answer after I tell you what happened. Feng Wu described what Feng Lu did in the tombs and smirked. After how she provoked me over and over again, I think I was very lenient with her. She shrugged. Feng Lu had thought that as her cousin, Feng Wu would forgive her, but she had forgotten that she had never shown Feng Wu any sisterly kindness. The three elders fell silent again. They never thought that Feng Wu would have gone through so much hardship. From Feng Wu's description, they realized that Feng Lu only had herself to blame. But what if you're lying to us? Elder Grain stared at Feng Wu. Feng Wu chuckled. If I really did kill Feng Lu for no reason, why isn't Feng Yanfeng trying to kill me now? Elder Grain didn't know what to say. Feng Wu said, Over 10 people were watching and they all saw how Feng Lu died. I won't admit to things I didn't do. Elder Jing nodded. You're right. You had many witnesses. Don't worry. I'm on your side. Go away. Elder Grain glared at Elder Jing. Feng Wu's answers to the first 2 questions were acceptable, so he moved on to the next question. You injured 4 sons of the Gu family, and they've given us an ultimatum. If we don't hand you over, they'll join hands with other families to boycott us. What explanation do you have for that? Feng Wu frowned. An ultimatum. Elder Grain showed her the letter. Look, it says so here. Feng Wu smiled. In that case, I'll have to tell you about what my aunt, Lady Gu, did. Hence, she told them about how Lady Gu had tried to marry the beautiful lady off to become a concubine. Naturally, she explained why she cut off Lady Gu's hand and destroyed her home. Even Elder Breeze was surprised by how capable she was. Elder Jing and Elder Grain's eyes sparkled as they looked at Feng Wu. Especially Elder Grain. He was short-tempered and would never wait to take his revenge. Therefore, he found the way Feng Wu got back at her enemies so satisfying. He was patting Feng Wu's shoulder when he suddenly realized that he was still supposed to be questioning her. They weren't friends yet. Ahem. Elder Grain cleared his throat and stared at Feng Wu again. Chapter 23-24 Untitled. Chapter 23-24 Untitled. Feng Wu didn't know what to say. Then what about the sons of the Gu family? Elder Grain asked. I know the answer to that question. I was there the whole time. Chowga finally had a chance to speak. Where do I begin? Well, let's start with Gu Xingqing. Chowga was a great storyteller, and she made everything sound so interesting. Elder Jing and Elder Grain listened in amazement. That's great. They're mere level 1 and level 3 spiritual lords. How dare they act arrogantly in front of Xiao Wu? She's a level 9 spiritual lord. Elder Jing said loudly. Elder Grain nodded as well. That was so true. A level 1 spiritual lord was nowhere close enough to being called a genius. Feng Wu was barely 14, and she was almost a level 1 spiritual king. Deep down, Elder Grain was so proud. Chowga said, The Gu family is such a bully. They started it first, and they're putting pressure on you now just because they're not Xiao Wu's mat. They're unbelievable. Elder Jing smacked his thigh. I would beat them up as well if I were Xiao Wu. She did nothing wrong. Elder Grain nodded as well. That's right. The two of them then looked at Elder Breeze in unison. Elder Breeze shrugged. The Gu family has a very capable elder, and I'm not his match. Elder Jing said, Then what are we going to do? We can't let them take Xiao Wu away. Elder Grain wasn't completely convinced yet, and he mumbled, There's still Feng Qi. Isn't she supposed to be as talented as Feng Wu? Elder Jing rolled his eyes at him. Are you sure about that? Elder Grain said, We don't know for sure. The two of them then started a staring contest. In the end, Elder Jing gave in. I see that you won't give up unless you see it with your own eyes. Bring Feng Qi here and let her go through the maze. You'll see what her capability is like. Elder Jing had completely switched to Feng Wu's side, but Elder Grain didn't feel the same way. Although he was impressed by Feng Wu, the letter said that Feng Qi was quite talented as well. What if she was also a genius? However, Elder Grain was utterly disappointed when he dressed up as the masked man and led Feng Qi into the formation. Feng Qi was a mess. She hadn't reached the maze yet, but she was already crying for her mom. And they could see that she was only a spiritual elder. Elder Jing rolled his eyes at Elder Grain. What did you say? What if she's a genius as well? Can you hear her crying now? Elder Grain lowered his head and couldn't say a word. Normally, if Elder Jing scolded him like this, he would jump to his feet and start exchanging blows with Elder Jing, but now, he only listened without uttering a word. He couldn't say anything to refute Elder Jing. What do you think we are? A blessed family that has one genius after another? We should feel so lucky to have Xiao Wu. You have to be delusional to wish for a second genius. Chapter 23-25, Untitled. Chapter 23-25, Untitled. How can Feng Qi call herself a genius? She only reached her level because they filled her with cultivation potions. Her foundation is anything but solid. That Feng Yanfeng has to be shameless to say that Feng Qi is more talented than Xiao Wu. Is he blind? No, he's just mean. Chaoga snorted. They didn't want to see Xiao Wu rise, so they tried to destroy her. Elder Jing pointed at Chaoga and glared at Elder Grain. Did you hear that? Are you still on their side now? If Feng Yanfeng lied about Feng Qi, we can deduce that everything he said about Xiao Wu was a lie, too. Elder Jing was furious. He'll have to pay for that. Elder Grain clenched his fists. He had been told off because of Feng Yanfeng, and he decided to teach that man a lesson as well. He was about to go get Feng Yanfeng and beat him up. But Feng Wu made a proposal that puzzled them all. You want to handle Feng Yanfeng yourself? Elder Grain was perplexed. Why won't you let us help you? By then, Feng Wu had figured out what Elder Grain was like, so she chuckled. I just want to expose him when the time is right, and that's not now. So, please don't let Feng Yanfeng hear about our meeting. Is that all right? Elder Jing agreed before Elder Grain could say anything. Elder Jing liked Feng Wu very much, and he was looking forward to seeing what Feng Wu would do. Achoo! Feng Yanfeng sneezed in his study. He rubbed his nose and felt a little strange. What's wrong? Did you catch a cold? Shall I fetch the doctor? Lady Wang walked in with some dessert. Feng Yanfeng shook his head. Somebody's probably talking behind my back. Don't worry. Lady Wang whispered, What about Feng Wu? Feng Yanfeng was very confident. I've given them a full report and the elders know what happened. They've stayed in the backyard for so long and have hardly met anyone. They'll believe whatever I tell them. Lady Wang was excited. Are you saying that we'll soon be rid of Feng Wu? Feng Yanfeng said, Elder Grain supports us. Lady Wang smiled brightly. But she wasn't so happy the next day. What's going on? She walked into the study to find Feng Yanfeng sitting there with a long face. He handed her a piece of paper. Lady Wang read it and frowned. Because the elders were informing them that their request had been refused. Lady Wang couldn't believe her eyes. She rubbed her eyes and read the paper again. The reply seemed to be laughing at the couple. Why is this happening? Weren't you so confident yesterday? Why did they turn us down? Her first reaction was to question Feng Yanfeng. Chapter 23-26, Untitled. Chapter 23-26, Untitled. Feng Yanfeng was frustrated as well. How am I supposed to know? Elder Grain really did agree to my request yesterday. What he didn't say was that when he went to see the elders again, Elder Grain's attitude had completely turned around. He looked at Feng Yanfeng as if he was looking at a villain. Feng Yanfeng rubbed his forehead in frustration. Somehow, he couldn't get Elder Grain's meaningful look out of his mind. It made him feel that something was about to happen. Lady Wang cringed when Feng Yanfeng shouted at her. She didn't dare voice any more complaints, but she was already beginning to hatch a new plan. She had always had a plan B. The elders had been plan A. Things would be a lot easier if they agreed to kick Feng Wu out of the clan. The Gu family was her other way out. After she left the study, she went to see Lady Gu. You want the Gu family to force the Feng clan's hand? Lady Gu smiled bitterly and shook her head. That won't happen. Why? Lady Wang was confused. Didn't Feng Wu injure you and 4 of their sons? How can the Gu family stand it? Lady Gu gave her a strange look. It gave Lady Wang the creeps. Why are you looking at me like that? Lady Gu said, Do you really not know? Lady Wang shook her head. Lady Gu said, I went to beg my brother, but he turned me down, so I went to ask my parents for help. My mom told me a secret. Lady Wang asked, What is it? Lady Gu took a deep breath and said, All spiritual kings are forbidden to take part in this matter. Breaking the rule is punishable by death. Lady Wang put a hand on her chest. Where did that come from? Why didn't I hear anything? Lady Gu shook her head. My mom doesn't know either. She said that my brother told her. I think my brother knows where that order came from. Lady Wang asked, Could it have come from your brother? Lady Gu frowned. I don't think so. That wouldn't make sense. Lady Wang said, That is to say, as long as we don't use force, we can do whatever we want, like trying a woman's way. Lady Gu's eyes lit up. Do you have any suggestions? Lady Wang had been thinking these days, and she had actually come up with a plan. However, it would need Feng Wu's participation to work. That's it. My mother will be celebrating her 80th birthday in a few days. Lady Gu cried out. That's a great opportunity. In the next few days we can befriend Feng Wu. Only then will she go with us. There was a sinister look in Lady Gu's eyes. Lady Wang asked curiously, Can you befriend Feng Wu now? Lady Gu narrowed her eyes. As long as we can defeat her in the end, I don't mind putting up with her for a little longer. Her tone gave Lady Wang the creep. Feng Wu didn't go to the restricted area in the next few days, because she knew that it wasn't the right time yet, and she didn't want Feng Yanfeng to notice her relationship with the elders. Xiao Wu, I've been a little nervous lately. It's like I'm waiting for a sword hanging above my head to fall, but it just won't fall, Xiaoga complained to Feng Wu. Chapter 23-27 Untitled. Chapter 23-27 Untitled. Feng Wu felt the same way. She had even more things on her plate. She hadn't finished the 10th trial yet, and the 11th had yet to be announced. Feng Yanfeng, Lady Gu, and Lady Wang were giving her trouble. She also had to handle what was going on between her mother and the Gu family. She also hadn't figured out what was so mysterious about Year 4 yet. However, she then remembered the intelligence department. The head was Qin Mo, and there were 3 divisions: Military Intelligence, Espionage Department, and the Secret Guards. Military Intelligence gathered military information, the Espionage Department was in charge of spies, and the Secret Guards kept an eye on all the officials. And Lord Gu was a government official. At that thought, Feng Wu took out the token. It came from Emperor Wu himself, and she was the deputy head of the intelligence department in name, that gave her access to the information she needed. She went to the intelligence department with the token. If she had asked around before, she wouldn't have been able to find the place. And she wouldn't get anywhere without the token. Luckily, she had it. Everyone in the intelligence department looked extremely serious. To her surprise, she saw a familiar face. Xiao Wu. Feng Sun was excited to see her. No one even looked at them when Feng Sun cried out her name. Xiao Wu, I'm so glad that you're here. I was going to see you. Feng Sun rubbed his eyes. Seeing how exhausted he looked, Feng Wu couldn't help asking, what happened? To other people, Feng Sun was only a young lord, but he was in fact a member of the intelligence department, and his main task was to keep an eye on the department for Jun Linyuan. Feng Sun yawned, which brought tears to his eyes. He looked frustrated when he said, Xiao Wu, I can't do anything without you. He then tried to hug her. Feng Wu said, Hey, be civil. Tell me what this is about, or I'm leaving. Fine, I'll tell you. Feng Sun pressed her down in a chair before taking a seat himself. He then said seriously, It's about the revival list. Really? Feng Wu was intrigued. Feng Sun said solemnly, With the list you gave us, we should have been able to catch them all, but in the end 3 of them got away. Feng Wu knew that because she could see it in her log. Until they caught those 3 people, Feng Wu couldn't finish the 10th trial. And if she didn't finish that trial, she wouldn't be able to get the 2nd broken star piece to wake up her beautiful master. It frustrated Feng Wu to think of that possibility. That was why she had come here today. The 3 that got away are captains. Feng Sun gritted his teeth. They're all spiritual kings and very hard to catch. I don't know what to do. Xiao Wu, do you have any ideas? Feng Sun was at his wits' end. His Majesty is furious and has given me an ultimatum. If I can't catch them in 3 days, I won't have this job anymore. Feng Wu said, Tell me everything you've done so far. Chapter 23-28 Untitled. Chapter 23-28 Untitled. Hence, Feng Sun told her everything in detail. What do you think? Any clues? Feng Sun asked nervously. Feng Wu rubbed her chin and thought for a moment. Have you checked everywhere? She asked. Feng Sun said, Yes. We left no stone unturned, but we found nothing. Feng Wu suddenly had an idea. Did you say that all 3 captains were injured? Feng Sun said, Yes. It was a fierce battle, and one of them was definitely severely injured. The other 2 have minor injuries. Plus, we've closed down the city now, and no one is allowed to leave. They have to be in the imperial capital. Feng Wu rubbed her chin and was deep in thought. Feng Sun looked at her expectantly. He knew that with Feng Wu here, all his problems would be solved. Have a look at this. Feng Wu handed him a piece of paper. Feng Sun read it. It was the message Gu Xingyuan had left next to Qiuling. Feng Sun was furious. Did he do something to you? Feng Wu said, Don't worry, I taught him a lesson. Have a sniff. Do you notice anything? Feng Sun shook his head. I can't smell anything. Feng Wu smiled. Try again. Feng Sun smacked his head. Gosh. I see. He jumped to his feet. Wait. Feng Wu stopped him. There's no rush. We need a plan so that we don't alarm them. Feng Sun was very excited. Xiao Wu, I knew you could help me. You're the smartest. By the way, why have you stopped visiting Boss Jun? Feng Wu was avoiding Jun Linyuan now, so she changed the subject. Are you familiar with the secret guards? Feng Sun said, Of course I am. So are you. Feng Wu's eyes lit up. Do you mean Xian Yi? Feng Sun had wanted to keep her guessing, but Feng Wu had already figured it out. Both Xian Yi and I were promoted after we got back. I'm still in the espionage department, but Xian Yi went to work for the secret guards. Feng Wu nodded and went to find Xian Yi. Fallen Star Yard. Feng Wu was cultivating in the yard when she heard footsteps outside. Is Sister Xiao Wu in? Feng Wu frowned when she heard the voice. Granny Zhao turned the person down. Miss Wu is cultivating now. Miss Qi, please go back. It was Feng Qi. Feng Qi bit her lip and put on a sad face. Sister Xiao Wu still won't see me, right? Granny Zhao said, Miss Qi, please leave. Feng Qi stomped her foot and left reluctantly. As soon as they were far away enough, Xiaojia, Feng Qi's maid, started complaining. Miss Qi, we don't have to do this every day. This is so humiliating. Feng Qi didn't say anything. Xiaojia went on. Miss, why are we doing this? After what she did to us. Feng Qi stopped and said coldly, she won't be around for much longer. As her cousin, shouldn't I bid her farewell? Xiaojia was confused. Chapter 23-29, Untitled. Chapter 23-29, Untitled. Inside Fallen Star Yard. Granny Zhao closed the door and said grumpily, What's the matter with Miss Qi these days? She's been coming here all the time, bringing gifts and apologizing. If she keeps doing this, I'll start changing my opinion of her. Feng Wu said, Next time she's here, let her in. Granny Zhao was surprised. Miss Wu, are you going to forgive her and start talking to her family again? Feng Wu nodded. That's right. Granny Zhao was confused. Feng Wu chuckled. Granny Zhao, don't worry. I just need to put an end to this thing. Granny Zhao looked perplexed. She had no idea what Feng Wu was talking about. As expected, Feng Qi came again that afternoon. Granny Zhao sighed. Feng Wu smiled at her. Granny Zhao had no choice but to open the door and let Feng Qi in. Sister Xiao Wu, you finally let me in. As soon as Feng Qi got in, she held Feng Wu's arm and wouldn't let go. Xiaoga was shocked. Was this person really Feng Qi? If she didn't know better, she would think that Feng Qi and Feng Wu were loving sisters. Feng Wu brushed off Feng Qi's hands and picked up her cup. Why do you want to see me? Feng Qi's eyes twinkled. Sister Xiao Wu, could you do me a little favor? Feng Wu asked, What favor? Feng Qi said, Tomorrow is my grandmother's 80th birthday. Sister Xiao Wu, will you go with me? Xiaoga couldn't stand it anymore. Feng Qi, have you lost your mind? Feng Wu beat up 4 of their sons. Going there will only get her killed. So, this is why you've been playing nice these days. You're so evil. Feng Qi had always been easily provoked. Hearing what Xiaoga said, she almost lost her temper. However, she remembered what her mother told her, so she took a deep breath and fought back her anger. She took Feng Wu's arm again. Sister Xiao Wu, although my 4 cousins all lost the battle, they really admire your talent and want to befriend you. They just don't know how to take the first step. After all, they're boys. Will you go with me? My grandmother has been worried about me, fearing that we won't get along. If she sees how friendly we are, she'll be very happy. Seeing that Feng Wu was listening, Feng Qi went on. Plus, don't you want to cancel that marriage contract for your mother? Feng Wu narrowed her eyes. Feng Qi whispered, My uncle says that you have to go and get the letter yourself. Feng Wu asked, Is that true? Feng Qi said, Of course. My uncle said so himself. Seeing that Feng Wu was considering the offer, Xiaoga held her hand. Xiao Wu, don't listen to her. The Gu family is so dangerous. Who knows what they'll do to you there? Feng Qi said, My uncle says that if Feng Wu doesn't have the courage to go, how can she make further achievements in her cultivation? Chapter 23-30, Untitled. Chapter 23-30, Untitled. If you don't have the courage, there's no reason for him to feel threatened by you. In that case, there's no reason for him to call off the marriage. That was an outright threat. You! Xiaoga bellowed. You're threatening Xiao Wu. Feng Qi shrugged. Of course not. I'm just stating the facts. Xiaoga held Feng Wu's hand. Xiao Wu, don't listen to her. We have many ways to cancel that marriage. You can always go to His Royal Highness for help. I'll go, said Feng Wu. Feng Qi immediately looked relieved. Sister Xiao Wu, you have to keep your promise then. I'll pick you up tomorrow afternoon and we'll go together. Feng Wu nodded. Feng Qi happily left with her maid. As soon as Feng Qi left, Xiaoga's face darkened. Xiao Wu, how could you say yes? You know perfectly well how dangerous it is. Feng Wu beamed at her. She asked, "What do you think of Fallen Star Yard?" Chowga said, "It's great. Also, it's so well guarded that no one can get in." Feng Wu looked up at the sky and asked, "Do you know what the best defense is?" Chowga shook her head. "Attack." Feng Wu smiled at her. Chowga's eyes lit up. "Are you saying that you know how dangerous it is, but you're still going because you want to initiate an attack?" Feng Wu nodded. Chowga was concerned. "You've come up with a thorough plan, right? Please don't put yourself in danger." Feng Wu nodded, just to appease her. In reality, every plan could go wrong, and nothing was absolutely safe. Feng Wu didn't know what tricks the Gu family would play. She would just go with the flow. The next day, Feng Qi arrived early in the afternoon. Chowga answered the door. She glared at Feng Qi. "I'm going too." Feng Qi smirked inwardly. "Of course. Come with us," she said without hesitation. At an angle the others couldn't see, Feng Qi had a sinister smile on her face. They soon left. Lady Gu and Lady Wang shared a carriage. Feng Qi, Feng Wu, Feng Sang, and Chowga were in another. The maids all sat in a third carriage. Chiuling's hand was almost healed, and she insisted on going with Feng Wu, so Feng Wu let her go as well. Lady Gu and Feng Qi were astonished when they saw Chiuling. Gu Xingyuan had told them that he had cut off Chiuling's hand in revenge, but now, Lady Gu and Feng Qi looked at each other. Chiuling still had both hands. Lady Gu asked Chiuling excitedly, "What's going on with your hand? I thought you were severely injured." Chiuling said indifferently, "Do you want to ask why I still have this hand?" Lady Gu gritted her teeth and nodded. Chiuling smiled. "It's thanks to Miss Wu's great medical skills. She can reattach severed hands." Chapter 2331 Untitled. Chapter 2331 Untitled. Lady Gu was shocked. Feng Wu smiled at her and said, "That's why I don't understand. Why didn't you come to me to reattach your hand?" Lady Gu asked, "Can you really do that?" Feng Wu said, "Chiuling is the perfect example, isn't she?" Lady Gu was tempted. However, after so many days, her wound had almost closed. Even if Feng Wu helped her, her hand couldn't be reattached. "Will you reattach my hand after we come back?" she asked Feng Wu. "Aunt, don't you know?" Feng Wu gave her a strange look. "What?" Feng Wu said, "After 24 hours, the success rate goes down to 10%, not to mention that your wound has almost closed up. Where's the severed hand? Do you still have it?" Lady Gu said, "We buried it." Feng Wu shrugged. "In that case, it'll be rotten by now. How am I supposed to reattach it? Aunt, that hope is long gone." "As for the hand," Feng Wu smirked, "it'll be a reminder to you to tell you that you shouldn't stick your hand where it doesn't belong." Lady Gu glared at Feng Wu. If Feng Wu kept provoking her like that, she wouldn't be able to play nice for much longer. Soon, they arrived at the Gu family. They were welcomed into the house after they got off the carriages. Even the doorman knew that Feng Wu wasn't on friendly terms with the Gu family, so he couldn't help but give her a few more looks. Chowga stopped Feng Wu and gave her a warning look. "I told you. There's going to be trouble." Chowga glanced around them and looked alarmed. "We're on a battlefield now. It's not too late to leave yet." "No, it is." Feng Wu held Chowga's hand. "If we're in danger, protect yourself first. Got it?" Chowga pouted. Feng Wu smiled. "Don't worry. I cherish my life more than you think. Although it was going to be dangerous, it would be worth it." Feng Qi took Feng Wu's hand and led her inside. "Sister Wu, come with me. The garden is right over there, and that's where all the young people are. We have many guests today. Let me introduce them to you." Seeing that Feng Qi was dragging Feng Wu away, Chowga and Chiuling quickly followed them. There were indeed many people in the garden. At this time of the year, snow covered the ground, giving the garden a serene feel. All the colorful lights looked even more stunning in the snow. When Feng Wu arrived, the garden was already packed. There were 3 barbecue stands in the garden, and fresh venison was gradually turning golden. The meat sizzled and gave off a great aroma. Seeing Feng Qi, someone cried out, "Who do we have here? Isn't it the famous Feng Wu?" Whoosh! Immediately, all eyes were on her. A few people wanted to stab her body with their gazes. The 4 Gu brothers whom she had defeated were all there. Xu Yunruo was there. So was Gong Sun Qing, as well as Dugu Mengshi and Dugu Yamo. Behind the Gu brothers were a few teenagers whom Feng Wu didn't know. Chapter 2332 Untitled. Chapter 2332 Untitled. Seeing Feng Wu, Gu Xingqing almost jumped to his feet. He asked Feng Qi, "What's she doing here? Why did you bring her here?" Feng Qi still had a plan to carry out, so she had to make sure that Feng Wu remained here. "Brother Xingqing, it was only a misunderstanding before. You fought, but I'm sure you can make up over some wine." Feng Qi smiled. "Sister Wu and I also had a misunderstanding before, but we've reconciled as well." Gu Xingqing wanted to scold her, but Feng Qi cut him off. "Brother Xingqing, if you consider me as your sister, then Sister Wu should be your sister as well. If she upset you before, I'll apologize to you on her behalf. I know you're a magnanimous person." Gu Xingqing was shocked. He had wanted to get even for Feng Qi, but it seemed that Feng Qi and Feng Wu had already forgiven each other. Someone slowly clapped. Everyone turned in that direction. "Your Royal Highness!" The Gu brothers forgot about their questions for Feng Qi, and all of them stood up to greet Jun Linshan, the second prince. Jun Linshan smiled at Feng Qi. "I didn't know that Miss Qi was such a kind and generous young lady. How wonderful!" Feng Qi lowered her head shyly and bowed. "Thank you, Your Royal Highness." Jun Linshan then looked at Feng Wu. He had to admit that she was stunning. Even just standing there, she was still the center of all attention. "It's been a while." He walked up to her and lifted her chin. "How have you been? It seems you've lost some weight." He was touching her. Feng Wu was about to smack his hand away, but Jun Linshan anticipated it and drew back his hand before Feng Wu could do anything. Feng Wu glared at Jun Linshan. But other people didn't see it that way. Many people were confused. Wasn't Feng Wu supposed to be close to the crown prince? By the looks of it, she and the second prince were also. Feng Sang frowned and glared at Feng Wu. "Behave yourself. You're a disgrace to our clan." Chaoga didn't like the sound of that. "Shut your mouth. What did Xiao Wu do?" Feng Sang smirked. "You should ask her." Chaoga said, "No, I won't. Everything Xiao Wu does is above board. I want to hear your story." Feng Sang snorted. "Fine. Doesn't she go to see the crown prince in the middle of the night all the time? Why is she so familiar with the second prince now? I'd like to know which prince she's after, the crown prince or the second prince." What was that? Feng Wu used to go to the crown prince's residence all the time in the middle of the night. Immediately, people began to give Feng Wu strange looks. That was very bold. Feng Sang sneered. Too bad for her. Despite all her efforts, the crown prince has never agreed to marry her. Feng Wu, you must be panicking now. So, you're looking for another way out. Chapter 2333 Untitled. Chapter 2333 Untitled. Wow. More people were staring at Feng Wu now. Instead of explaining his behavior, Jun Linshan just stood there and looked at Feng Wu with a smile. Feng Sang's words immediately turned Feng Wu into a public enemy. The air felt stifling. Suddenly Jun Linshan chuckled. Everyone looked at him in confusion. Jun Linshan put his hands behind his back and smiled at Feng Wu. "If the crown prince won't marry you, I can give you a chance. Just think about it." At an angle that other people couldn't see, Feng Wu stomped on his toes and twisted her foot. Jun Linshan, you're very talkative today. Sss. Jun Linshan sucked in his breath. That was painful. He felt that she had crushed his bones. From afar, Feng Wu and Jun Linshan did look quite familiar with each other. She was about to push Jun Linshan away when something happened. Thump, thump, thump. Someone was running toward them. So, you're the woman who's trying to seduce my prince, a woman shouted. Then, there was the sound of a whip lashing through the air. Her shriek made many people jump. Look, that's Miss Tao of the Tao family. As in one of the 10 major clans? General Southwest is from that family, right? She's so fierce. You don't say. I heard that she's ferocious. Shush. She's coming. Miss Tao aimed her silver whip at Feng Wu. Seeing Miss Tao running toward them, Jun Linshan involuntarily pushed Feng Wu away. Poor Feng Wu. She had barely said a word before everyone started slandering her. Who are you? How dare you seduce Prince Jun Linshan? Miss Tao pointed at Feng Wu with her whip. Feng Wu narrowed her eyes. Feng Qi immediately said, Sister Tao, she's Feng Wu, my cousin. This is a misunderstanding. There's nothing between her and the prince. They were just chatting. Just chatting? What kind of woman stands so close when she's chatting to a man? Miss Tao rolled her eyes at Feng Qi. Shao Qi, you're a kind girl, but there are many evil people in this world. With that, she pushed Feng Qi out of the way and glared at Feng Wu. Feng Wu knew that she would be facing some trouble here tonight, but she didn't expect it to start so soon. Chaoga wanted to say something, but Feng Wu shook her head. Aren't you the crown prince's maid? Have you been abandoned? Is that why you're after Prince Jun Linshan now? You're such a... Smack. Feng Wu slapped Miss Tao. Watch what you say. Everyone fell silent. They had been hoping for some bickering, but they didn't expect Feng Wu to turn physical. How dare you hit me? Chapter 2334 Untitled. Chapter 2334 Untitled. Miss Tao was the daughter of a great general and was used to getting things her way. She had never been humiliated like this before. Infuriated, she raised her whip and lashed out at Feng Wu. Feng Wu grabbed the whip. Miss Tao wanted to pull the whip back, but no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't make Feng Wu loosen her grip. She burst into tears and ran away. The crowd was speechless. Someone asked in a low voice, Is there something going on between Miss Tao and Prince Jun Linshan? You don't know? His Majesty made a marriage announcement in relation to Prince Jun Linshan the other day. He's to marry Miss Tao. So, Miss Tao is going to be the future wife of the prince? No wonder she was so angry. As a girl, Feng Wu should be more discreet. Why is she so familiar with the prince? If I were Miss Tao, I would be mad, too. Most of the guests here were friends of the Gu family, so barely anyone liked Feng Wu. Jun Linshan looked at Feng Wu and sighed. Xiao Wu, you didn't have to. He rubbed Feng Wu's head, and before she could react, he dashed off as fast as his legs could carry him. Tao Qingqing, wait! Feng Wu was furious. Why did that man do that? He lifted her chin and rubbed her head when she wasn't looking. That was so suggestive. He deliberately made other people think that they were close. Feng Wu already could imagine how furious Jun Linyuan would be when he heard about it. The crowd all gave her strange looks, and Gu Xingqing smirked. If there's nothing going on between them, why would Prince Jun Linshan rub her head? Gu Xingyun said. The prince lifted her chin as well. That was so intimate. He was obviously flirting with her. All the men laughed. Feng Qi was satisfied. Feeling that her job was done, she ignored Feng Wu after that. The teenagers all went to hang out with the Gu brothers. Feng Wu and Chaoga were left alone. Chaoga wasn't happy at all. She didn't understand why Feng Wu wanted to come here. Are you all right? Someone patted Feng Wu on the back. Feng Wu turned around and saw that it was Gong Sun Qing. Gong Sun Qing was amazed to see Feng Wu again. 6 months ago, she and Feng Wu took the entrance exam together. Feng Wu received the highest marks, and Gong Sun Qing had her doubts then. But now, I heard that you skipped year 2 and went to year 3. The Gongsun family was also very well informed. Sort of. Feng Wu didn't tell her that she could enter year 4 at any moment. Shall we chat over there? Gongsun Qing liked Feng Wu and was displeased when she saw how the others treated her. She pointed at a pavilion a short distance away. Chapter 2335, Untitled. Chapter 2335, Untitled. Feng Wu nodded and went with Gongsun Qing. The two of them sat in the pavilion and chatted happily. However, Feng Wu never let her guard down. Because she knew that the Gu family would try to set her up with even more tricks. You're doing great. You're in year 3 now, so you must be a spiritual elder now, said Gongsun Qing enviously. Feng Wu didn't want to reveal her real ability, but Chaoga answered for her. Chaoga said, Spiritual elder? Xiao Wu has been a spiritual lord for a very long time. She even defeated Gu Xingyuan, the level 3 spiritual lord. The Gongsun family didn't want to upset Gongsun Qing and had only told her that Feng Wu had entered year 3, without telling her what Feng Wu's cultivation level was. Gongsun Qing's face went pale for a brief moment. No one would be happy to hear that they had been surpassed by people who used to be their equal. Seeing Gongsun Qing's pale face, Feng Wu looked at Chaoga in resignation. Chaoga looked innocently at her and didn't realize what she had done. Feng Wu didn't know what to say. Chaoga was probably the only one who wouldn't feel upset no matter how fast Feng Wu's progress was. Just then, they heard someone talking loudly nearby. Smack! There was the sound of someone being slapped, followed by a voice. You idiot! Do it again, and you won't get away so easily. Gongsun Qing had been trying to find a way out of this embarrassing situation. Hearing the voice, she tugged at Feng Wu. Let's go have a look. Feng Wu didn't object. When they got there, they saw a girl squatting in the bushes and crying as another girl scolded her in a condescending manner. Gu Shi, she's your younger sister. Why did you hit her? Gongsun Qing seemed to know the Gu family well. She glared at Gu Shi and defended the crying girl. Gu Shi was the 8th child of the Gu family, whereas that girl was only the daughter of a concubine. She was known as 12. Seeing Gongsun Qing and Feng Wu, Gu Shi snorted and grumbled, It's my unlucky day. 12 only dared to cry out loud when Gu Shi was gone. Gongsun Qing felt sorry for her and told Feng Wu, 12 isn't the daughter of Lord Gu's wife. She's quite timid and is bullied all the time. Look at her clothes. She's a young lady of the house, but the fabric has all balled up. Feng Wu saw that the girl was only 8 or 9. On such a cold day, she was only wearing a thin robe. Her hands were red from the cold. Gongsun Qing told Feng Wu, they didn't treat her like this in the beginning. When she was little, a test showed that she was a genius and she made rapid progress. Everyone said that her future was so promising. In the past few years, however, her cultivation stagnated and her level declined. Right now, she barely has any spiritual essence left, so the Gu family has been ignoring her. Even her maids pick on her. Poor girl. Xiao Wu, that sounds like what you went through. Chaoga cried out. You lost your cultivation ability once and started again, didn't you? Chapter 2336, Untitled. Chapter 2336, Untitled. Hearing that, Gongsun Qing's eyes lit up. That's right. How could I forget such an important thing? Xiao Wu, tell 12 how you got your ability back. She then said to 12, Come here and talk to Sister Wu. Maybe she'll help you get your ability back. In this world which valued martial prowess above everything else, If a person didn't have cultivation ability, no one would care about them. 12 looked up at Feng Wu with big, limpid eyes. Xiao Wu. The look in her eyes was so pitiful that no one could turn her down. Chowga couldn't bear to see the girl like this. She took Feng Wu's hand and said, Xiao Wu, I feel sorry for her. Feng Wu stood up and smiled at Gong Sun Qing. It's getting cold. I think it's going to snow. The old lady's birthday banquet is about to start. Let's head back. What? Gong Sun Qing didn't know if that was a yes or a no. Feng Wu walked in front and Chowga followed. She kept darting glances at Feng Wu, trying to figure out what the latter was thinking. Unfortunately, when Feng Wu wanted to hide something, no one could see through her. They arrived at the main hall to find everyone there. Feng Wu had calculated the time in advance. She didn't want to kneel on the ground to celebrate the old lady's birthday, so she only went there when the celebration was over. And her timing was perfect. However, she seemed to attract attention wherever she went. As soon as she walked in, someone cried out, "Speak of the devil! Feng Wu is here." Lady Wang was perfectly polite when other people were around. She waved at Feng Wu with a smile. "Xiao Wu, come here and say hello to our host. My lady, this is the naughty fifth daughter of my family." What happened in the Feng clan was known only to the Feng and Gu families. The others didn't know about Feng Wu cutting off Lady Gu's hand. Of course, the old Mrs. Gu knew all about it. Feng Wu looked at her. Old Mrs. Gu smiled warmly, but there was a cold glint in her eyes. "Such a pretty girl. Come here and let me look at you." Old Mrs. Gu had Feng Wu sit down next to her and said, "The longer I look at her, the more I like her." She then looked up at Lady Wang. "Is she engaged? We have 6 boys of her age in the family. She can pick whoever she likes." Many ladies were sitting around them along with their daughters and maids. It was a big crowd. Feng Wu recognized most of them. There was Lady Dugu, Mrs. Zhua, and Lady Northern Feng, whom Feng Wu was very familiar with. The few people that she didn't recognize were probably from the Tao family and the Long family, which was the maternal family of Lord Gu's wife. Hearing what the old lady said, many ladies lowered their heads and chuckled into their handkerchief. Lady Wang seemed embarrassed as well. Chapter 2337 Untitled. Chapter 2337 Untitled. The general mood was rather embarrassing. Chowga was furious. That old lady was even worse than Lady Wang. They knew perfectly well that Feng Wu was engaged to the crown prince, but that old lady still asked that question. She was deliberately trying to embarrass Feng Wu. Chowga said grumpily, "Xiao Wu is already engaged. I'm afraid that your boys have lost the chance." The old lady didn't expect to hear such a blunt reply. She frowned and asked, "Who's she?" Lady Wang told her who Chowga's father was. "A rank 3 official? No wonder she's so ill-bred," Mrs. Gu interjected. "I don't think they're acquainted with our family." She was suggesting that Chowga wasn't welcome here. Feng Wu rose to her feet and chuckled. "If old Mrs. Gu doesn't like to have us here, we should be on our way." Of course, the Gu family couldn't let that happen. The old lady put on a smile and chided Mrs. Gu. "Don't say that. We're not that kind of family. If the young people want to visit us, of course, we'll welcome them." Chowga found the hospitality very suspicious. However, she couldn't figure out what the old lady was playing at just yet. She kept giving Feng Wu warning glances, telling her to be careful. Feng Wu patted her hand to calm her down. The old lady seemed to like Feng Wu. She held her hand and kept asking her questions. She hadn't heard the news of Feng Wu beating up the 4 Gu brothers yet. "Xiao Wu is in year 3? The old lady cried out. "I thought she was 8th in year 2. The old lady had sent people to find information on Feng Wu the day Lady Gu's hand was cut off, which was why she knew Feng Wu's ranking. Seeing that the old lady knew such detailed information, Feng Wu glanced at her and was even more wary. She's in year 3 now. Lady Northern Feng waved at Feng Wu to beckon her over. She said, Xiao Wu is my goddaughter. Of course I care about her grades. She got into year 3 just the other day. Mrs. Gu was hostile toward Feng Wu. Lady Northern Feng was obviously defending Feng Wu, but Mrs. Gu still said, That's very impressive, rising to year 3 at such a young age. However, she needs to work on her temper. Arrogance and pride will only affect her cultivation. Lady Northern Feng said, Don't worry about it. Year 3 isn't that hard for Xiao Wu at all. She can afford to take a break every now and then. Mrs. Gu said, Lady Northern Feng, that's not the right way to raise a child. She's only just entered year 3, and I'm sure that she's in the bottom half on the billboard. If she doesn't work on increasing her rank, it'll affect her confidence. The old lady nodded. That's true. Lady Northern Feng gave them a strange look. After some hesitation, she asked, Do you not know? Chapter 2338 Untitled. Chapter 2338 Untitled. Mrs. Gu asked, About what? Lady Northern Feng said, Do you not know that Feng Wu is first on the billboard now? Many people almost choked on their tea. First? Mrs. Gu cried out. She can't be. Gu Xingyuan has always been first. The old lady nodded. Lady Northern Feng said proudly, That's past history now. Xiao Wu skipped year 2 and entered year 3. Not only that, she's also ready to enter year 4 at any time. Isn't that amazing? Mrs. Gu said, Gu Xingyuan is a level 3 spiritual lord. How can this girl surpass him? A level 3 spiritual lord? Mrs. Dugu and Mrs. Zwar exchanged looks before they sipped their tea quietly. A level 3 spiritual lord really didn't mean much. As far as they knew, Feng Wu had already been a level 7 spiritual lord before she returned to the imperial capital. Mrs. Zwar remembered it clearly because she had seen it in the crystal ball. Master Zwar went to hunt Feng Wu down, but even he failed to kill her. Mrs. Zwar remembered it with much regret. However, Mrs. Gu knew nothing of that. She was so proud of Gu Xingyuan and couldn't accept the fact that Feng Wu had replaced him on the billboard. Fetch Xingyuan and let's ask him. Mrs. Gu smiled at Lady Northern Feng. Lady Northern Feng shrugged. Chief Zishuan had forbidden everyone from spreading the news. Although no one knew why she had given that order, they had still done as they were told. Therefore, even Mrs. Gu and the old lady didn't know what happened. Soon, Gu Xingyuan and Gu Xingmeng arrived together. Mrs. Gu held their hands and asked directly, Xingyuan, I need to ask you something. Tell everyone here what your ranking is in year 3. Gu Xingyuan's face turned scarlet red when he heard the question. He looked around and felt even more ashamed when he saw that everyone was looking at him. He then saw Feng Wu's eyes. What a pair of eyes! She gave a half-smile. Gu Xingyuan's first reaction was that Feng Wu was laughing at him. He pushed Mrs. Gu away and turned to leave. Xingyuan? Xingyuan? Mrs. Gu was perplexed. What's going on? Isn't he first? Why won't he say anything? Gu Xingmeng was speechless. Mother, why did you say that? Mrs. Gu said, I just. Gu Xingmeng pointed at Feng Wu. She's first now. Why did you ask my brother that question in front of so many people? He gave Feng Wu one last ferocious look before leaving the room. Everyone was speechless. Mrs. Gu was the most embarrassed of them all. She had been bragging about Gu Xingyuan as she tried to teach Lady Northern Feng how to raise her goddaughter. As it turned out, Feng Wu was better than her son. She had no choice but to apologize to Lady Northern Feng. I didn't know. Feng Wu is such a genius. She's the top student in year 3 already. Chapter 2339 Untitled. Chapter 2339 Untitled. Mrs. Zwa pursed her lips. These people didn't know anything. Feng Wu only exerted the power of a level 3 spiritual lord, when she is in fact a level 7 spiritual lord already. When she reveals her true capability, will they be shocked once more? She then thought about her children, Zwa Qingyu and Zwa Qingxian. Feng Wu had achieved so much in the grassland, but she had lost her children forever. At that thought, she could barely control her hatred of Feng Wu. Mrs. Gu and Lady Northern Feng showered Feng Wu with praise, but many people didn't like it, especially Miss Tao. She frowned and said, "Yes, she's talented, but she's a disgrace and has no sense of what's moral. I have no respect for her whatsoever." Chowga had long found Miss Tao an annoying character. Hearing that, she said angrily, "What's that supposed to mean?" Miss Tao snorted. "You know perfectly well what I mean." Chowga said, "Use standard English. I don't understand sarcasm." Miss Tao was used to getting things her way. She rose to her feet and said, "Feng Wu was acting familiar with Prince Jun Linshan in the garden just now. Everyone saw it. We're not blind." Whoosh! All eyes were on Feng Wu. Only the teenagers had been in the garden just now, but here in the main hall, there were only female guests consisting of the noble ladies and their daughters. Jun Linshan wasn't here. Chowga rose to her feet as well, looking as intimidating as Miss Tao. "There's no acting familiar with Prince Jun Linshan. The prince flirted with Feng Wu." Miss Tao said, "See? You've admitted it yourself. There's something going on between her and the prince." Chowga was furious. That wasn't what she meant. "Xiao Wu, how many times do I have to tell you? A girl has to be aware of her actions. You can't do things that will mislead other people," Lady Wang said in a seemingly helpless tone. "I know there's nothing going on between you and the prince, but other people may assume things. Otherwise, why are you the only one they gossip about?" Feng Wu glanced at her. That woman was getting better at this. After returning from the grassland, she had stopped attacking Feng Wu directly. Instead, she stayed behind the scenes to egg Lady Guan. She was more careful with her choice of words as well. What she said pretty much confirmed what Miss Tao said. It was slander in disguise. Miss Tao gloated. "The crown prince will never marry you, but I'm going to marry Prince Jun Linshan soon. Feng Wu, stay away from my prince. Otherwise, I'll burn your house to the ground." Thump! Someone smacked the table. The sudden noise made everyone jump. They followed the sound and saw that it was Lady Northern Feng. She was the person with the highest social status here, and right now she was staring at Miss Tao with cold eyes. Chapter 2340 Untitled. Chapter 2340 Untitled. Miss Tao almost jumped. Reputation is very important to girls, and Xiao Wu's is impeccable. I won't allow you to slander her. Lady Northern Feng stared at Miss Tao. "Show me proof or shut up. If I hear you say something like that again, there will be consequences." The Tao family was about as prestigious as Northern Feng Mansion. However, Lady Northern Feng had been brought up by the Empress Dowager and was naturally more respected. Miss Tao was almost in tears. She stood there and didn't know what to do. Her mother patted her and was about to rise to her feet, when the old lady cried out, "Where's my dragon phoenix bracelet? I put it here just then." Immediately, everyone looked at her. Mrs. Gu quickly walked up to her and tried to calm her down. "Mother, don't worry. I'm sure we can find it." "Dragon phoenix bracelet? Is it the one we were appreciating just then?" asked Mrs. Gu. "It's a good bracelet, but—" Old Mrs. Gu snapped, "It's not precious because it looks nice. That bracelet is a family heirloom." "A family heirloom? How? Wasn't it just a bracelet?" Everyone looked confused. The old lady had always been level-headed, but her hands were shaking now. Mrs. Zwa and the other ladies looked at one another and wondered if the bracelet was really as important as the old lady said. Old Mrs. Gu grabbed her daughter-in-law's hand, so hard that her nails dug into her flesh. Look for it, now. Seeing how worried the old lady was, the others were even more concerned. The Long family of Dragon Valley was associated with the Gu family by marriage, and it was also where Mrs. Gu came from. Old Mrs. Long was also here to celebrate old Mrs. Gu's birthday. The two old ladies were friends, so old Mrs. Long asked, "Please tell us more. That dragon phoenix bracelet looks just like any other bracelet." Old Mrs. Gu looked like she was about to cry. "It may look like an ordinary bracelet, but there's a secret hidden inside." Old Mrs. Long asked, "Is it a space?" Old Mrs. Gu smiled wryly. "That's right. It's supposed to contain a storage space, but we haven't been able to open it so far. It's handed down in the family until one of us can open it. It contains a secret skill of the Gu family. We can't afford to lose it to an outsider." Old Mrs. Gu's face was covered with sweat. "Find it now." The others didn't think much of it at first, but then old Mrs. Gu told them about the storage space and the secret skill. Everyone grew excited. "We need to search for it," said Mrs. But old Mrs. Long nodded as well. "That's right. It's too precious." Mrs. Zwa asked old Mrs. Gu, "You had it on your wrist, didn't you?" Chapter 2341 Untitled. Chapter 2341 Untitled. Old Mrs. Gu was having trouble breathing, and Mrs. Gu tended to her. She nodded when she heard the question. "Yes, I did. I was wearing it, then my daughter-in-law wanted to look at it, so I took it off and gave it to her. Then we passed it around," said Mrs. Gu. "I handed it to Mrs. Dugu." Mrs. Dugu said, "I handed it to old Mrs. Long." Old Mrs. Long said, "I handed it to Lady Northern Foam." Mrs. Tao asked old Mrs. Gu, "I was the last one to handle it before passing it back to you. Do you remember that?" Old Mrs. Gu looked surprised. "Really? Right, I remember now." Mrs. Tao said, "Miss Feng Wu was the last to come into the room, and the bracelet was right on the table next to you." Mrs. Zwa nodded. "That's true. I saw it too." Mrs. Dugu hadn't seen it, but she now realized what was going on, so she nodded as well. "That's right. I saw it too. The bracelet was right there on the table." Mrs. Zwa said in a seemingly casual tone, "Then how can it be missing? Not many people have been walking around in the room." Mrs. Dugu said, "That's true. Miss Feng Wu was one of the few people who was walking around." Chowga snapped. "What's that supposed to mean?" Mrs. Zwa glanced at Feng Wu and said, "I suppose we can all close our eyes. If someone took it, they can use this chance to put it back." Old Mrs. Gu nodded. "That's a good idea. Someone fetch some handkerchiefs and cover our eyes. If someone has taken the bracelet by mistake, just put it back on the table. No one will blame them. We'll all cover our eyes." Mrs. Zwa glanced at Feng Wu. Chowga tugged at Feng Wu. It was so obvious that they were insinuating it was her. Even so, Feng Wu remained unperturbed. She smiled at Chowga and said, "Don't worry. A clean hand needs no washing." Mrs. Zwa snorted inwardly. "A clean hand? There's no such thing." Nearly everyone in the room was trying to set Feng Wu up, and Mrs. Zwa believed that there was no way that Feng Wu could get away. Everyone's eyes were covered. The handkerchiefs were removed 5 minutes later. When old Mrs. Gu saw the empty table, she gasped for air. "Why is this happening?" she asked in disbelief. "Why won't they give it back?" This time, she looked right at Feng Wu. Everyone in the room noticed it. Lady Wang frowned. "My lady, this is very serious. We can't have a thief among us. No one is leaving until we find this person. Mrs. Tao nodded as well. This is abominable conduct, stealing something like this. If we don't catch this person now, they'll only do worse things in the future. Lady Gu said, in that case we should search everyone. Chapter 2342, Untitled. Chapter 2342, Untitled. The thief must still be in the room, and they have to have the bracelet on them. Search everyone, and we'll find the thief. Mrs. Tao nodded. I agree. Old Mrs. Gu said, I'm sorry for causing everyone so much trouble. If you've been sitting down, please remain seated. We'll only search the people who have been walking around. Only a few people fit that category. They were Feng Wu, Duan Chaoga, Feng Qi, and Tao Qingqing. Feng Qi volunteered. Go ahead. I didn't steal anything. I have nothing to hide. Miss Tao didn't like the idea at first, but hearing what Feng Qi said, she said arrogantly, I didn't steal it either, and nothing can change that. Immediately, everyone looked at Chaoga and Feng Wu. Xiao Wu, the looks in their eyes gave Chaoga the creeps. What should we do now? Feng Wu smiled. Let them search. Chaoga nodded. That's right. Let them search. We didn't take anything. Feng Wu looked at her and smiled in resignation. The girl was so naive. She would never be able to survive this cruel world on her own. The person frisking them was Granny Zhu, who was Mrs. Gu's personal maid. Chaoga said, Search me first. Feng Wu knew that Chaoga would be safe. Because she was the Gu family's target, and they wouldn't waste any energy on Chaoga. As expected, nothing was found on Chaoga. Granny Zhu looked at Feng Wu and Tao Qingqing. Miss Tao was as proud as a peacock. She pointed at Feng Wu and said, I don't mind being searched, but she has to be searched along with me. Granny Zhu looked at old Mrs. Gu. The old lady nodded. Old Mrs. Gu told Suxiang, Mrs. Gu's maid, to search Miss Tao. Granny Zhu would search Feng Wu. When Granny Zhu frisked Chaoga, she did it very quickly. It only took her a few seconds to finish the job, but it was a different story with Feng Wu. She started from Feng Wu's hair and carefully worked her way down. The longer it took, the more flustered Granny Zhu became. She couldn't find anything. How could that be? When everyone's eyes were covered, Granny Zhu had put the bracelet in Feng Wu's sleeve, but it wasn't there anymore. Granny Zhu was almost in tears. Feng Wu smiled at her. You've been staring at my sleeve. Is there anything wrong with it? Granny Zhu was speechless. Feng Wu took off her outer robe and handed it to her. There. Take a closer look. Granny Zhu took the robe in resignation. She searched every inch of it but found nothing. She then searched Feng Wu one more time, but to no avail. Granny Zhu was speechless. What was she supposed to tell the old lady? Old Mrs. Gu was staring at Feng Wu. She was waiting for Granny Zhu to find the bracelet, and she would pretend to pass out. That way they could blame everything on Feng Wu. However, Granny Zhu never found the bracelet, and the old lady couldn't carry out her plan. Chapter 2343, Untitled. Chapter 2343, Untitled. Just then, Suxiang, who was frisking Tao Qingqing, cried out, Found it. Those words caught everyone's attention. She held a small brocade box in her palm. It was just big enough to fit a bracelet. However, the bracelet had never been in a box, so it couldn't be what the old lady was looking for. And the old lady realized what that brocade box was. Realizing that things were getting out of hand, she gestured at Suxiang, trying to stop her. But Feng Wu would never let that happen. A small stone appeared under Suxiang's feet. Ah! Suxiang tripped and fell, and the box flew out of her hands. It shattered, and the content fell out. Gosh! What's that? Soon, the crowd realized that something was wrong because they heard strange breathing sounds coming from the box. It was the sound of people moaning and groaning. All the married women in the room immediately knew what it was. But Feng Qi didn't, so she picked it up. She took a look and was almost frightened to death. "Ah!" she screamed and stared at Tao Qingqing in disbelief. "You're so filthy! I didn't know that you were this kind of girl." Tao Qingqing was utterly confused. Filthy? Had Feng Qi lost her mind? She rolled her eyes at Feng Qi. Meanwhile, Lady Gu was dumbfounded. She had spent a small fortune on this spiritual fossil stone and had gone to a brothel to record the scenes. It was going to be used to set Feng Wu up. Feng Wu was already being slandered for flirting with Jun Linshan. If the others believed that she was watching such things, her reputation would be ruined forever. And if they incriminated her for stealing, Feng Wu would be destroyed for good. However, they had just found the spiritual fossil stone on Tao Qingqing. Lady Gu was confused, whereas Tao Qingqing's mother panicked. Tao Qingqing was dumbfounded when she saw what it was. How can I have that? It's not mine. Someone set me up." Tao Qingqing grabbed her mother's hand and said anxiously, "It's not mine. Mother, help me." Mrs. Tao was almost in tears. Tao Qingqing was her only daughter. She was about to marry Prince Jun Linshan, and if it was believed that she carried something like this on her. At that thought Mrs. Tao almost fainted. "Mother, it's not mine. Someone else put it there." Tao Qingqing was scared out of her wits. Mrs. Tao didn't have time to calm her down. She only wanted to shut down the recording now because the volume was at full blast. Her face was scarlet red. Old Mrs. Gu glared at Suxiang. The old lady was behind everything, so naturally she knew what was going on. That stone was supposed to be planted on Feng Wu. They didn't need to ruin Tao Qingqing's reputation. Chapter 2344 Untitled. Chapter 2344 Untitled. Moreover, it would make the Tao family hate their family. The Gu family had been trying to win the Tao family to their side, but now, old Mrs. Gu felt like killing herself. "Get that disgusting thing out of here and smash it. Now!" old Mrs. Gu shouted. Some maids immediately carried out the order. At that moment, Feng Qi was the only one who hadn't been searched. "What's this?" Granny Zhu finally found something on Feng Wu, and she snatched it from her. It was a piece of paper. That was the third trap for Feng Wu. Old Mrs. Gu was finally reassured. She was smart enough to have backup plans for the bracelet. The first was the stone, and the second was this piece of paper. Technically, it was a letter that could prove that Feng Wu was a spy of the Dongsang Kingdom. Even Lady Wang didn't expect the old lady to be so ruthless. If Feng Wu was charged with treason, the entire Feng clan would be destroyed. "Quickly! Show me the letter." Old Mrs. Gu couldn't wait to see it. She struggled to her feet and reached for the paper. Granny Zhu handed the folded paper to her. Feng Wu said, "Wait." Old Mrs. Gu grabbed the paper and stared at Feng Wu with a frantic look in her eyes. "What? Are you afraid of me seeing it?" Feng Wu asked. "You haven't opened it yet. How do you know that it's a letter?" Old Mrs. Gu said, "We'll see after we read it." Feng Wu shook her head. "That's my daily schedule. Please give it back to me." Old Mrs. Gu couldn't wait to unfold the paper. She snorted and said, "What schedule? It's not a letter that shows you've been colluding with our enemies, is it?" Before Feng Wu could object, she unfolded the paper. Some distance away, old Mrs. Long frowned. She felt that old Mrs. Gu was awfully desperate today, which wasn't like her usual self at all. Moreover, whenever old Mrs. Gu looked at Feng Wu, there was a ferocious look in her eyes. What was going on? Why was she targeting a child? Mrs. Dugu and Mrs. Zhou both saw the excitement in each other's eyes. This idea had come from Mrs. Zhou. They were looking forward to seeing Feng Wu go down, but old Mrs. Gu's face had darkened, and she remained silent. Why? What was going on? Mrs. Zwa couldn't stand it any more. She walked up to old Mrs. Gu as if she knew nothing and murmured, "What letter? I'd like to." However, she stiffened before she could finish. That was because it wasn't a letter at all. It really was a daily schedule. It was a plan from the time Feng Wu got up in the morning to when she went to bed at night. There was no empty time slot at all. How diligent! Mrs. Zwa was dumbfounded. She asked old Mrs. Gu with her eyes where the letter was. Old Mrs. Gu was as dumbfounded as she was. Of the two incriminating pieces of evidence, the spiritual fossil stone was found on Tao Qingqing. If word got out, Tao Qingqing would have no reputation left. Chapter 2345, Untitled. Chapter 2345, Untitled. The letter that was supposed to prove that Feng Wu was colluding with the enemy was nowhere to be found. Old Mrs. Gu glared at Feng Wu. Feng Wu remained as calm as ever. She smiled and held out her hand. "May I have my schedule back now?" So, it really was a schedule. Old Mrs. Long was intrigued. "May I have a look?" Feng Wu nodded. The more old Mrs. Long observed Feng Wu, the more she liked her. She had figured out by now that most of the people in this room were targeting Feng Wu and were hostile toward her. However, the girl remained level-headed and never lost her composure. How impressive! Seeing the schedule, old Mrs. Long asked in surprise, "Do you really do all this on a daily basis?" Feng Wu smiled and nodded. "How amazing! No wonder you are at the level you're at such a young age. Only a person that can endure hardship can make great achievements," old Mrs. Long said. She liked Feng Wu even more. The other people were all impressed by Feng Wu's schedule as well. She practically cultivated non-stop from early in the morning to midnight. That changed their impression of Feng Wu. Who wouldn't like a hard-working person? That's it then. The search has come up empty. Old Mrs. Gu was troubled. She needed time to figure out her next move. "Really? I don't think so." Chowga smirked. "Feng Qi hasn't been searched yet." Feng Qi shouted, "Duan Chowga, what's that supposed to mean?" Chowga said, "Why do you even ask? The three of us have all been searched thoroughly. Right, Granny Zhu?" Granny Zhu looked back at the old lady. Old Mrs. Gu rubbed her temples and nodded. Granny Zhu gritted her teeth and said, "Yes. I didn't find anything on Miss Feng Wu." Chowga said, "So, Xiao Wu is innocent, right?" Old Mrs. Gu wanted to choke Chowga. But everyone was watching, and she couldn't lose her temper. So she said reluctantly, "That's right." The old lady gritted her teeth when she said those words, which showed how frustrated she was. Chowga said, "Good. Since the three of us are all innocent, Feng Qi must have the bracelet." Feng Qi said angrily, "Nonsense. Why must I have it?" Chowga sneered at her. "The four of us are suspects and three of us have been searched. Since nothing was found, you must be the culprit. There's no need denying it." Lady Gu said angrily, "Fine. Let Granny Zhu search her. I'd like to see what she can find." Granny Zhu would pretend to search Feng Qi. Chapter 2346, Untitled. Chapter 2346, Untitled. However, Chowga stopped her. "That won't do," said Chowga. "Feng Qi is the old lady's granddaughter. Of course, you're on her side. Even if she stole it, you'll pretend that nothing happened and blame it on us. No, it can't be you." Old Mrs. Gu frowned. If there weren't so many people around, she would have had Chowga killed, but she couldn't do that while everyone was watching. Therefore, she could only stare at Chowga and Feng Wu. "What do you want, then?" Chowga snorted. "That's simple. I'll do the search. I'll search Feng Qi." "That should be fair," said Chowga. Feng Qi smirked. Why is that fair? What if you put something in my pocket? You're not frisking me. What about my people? Asked a calm voice. The crowd looked around and saw that it was Lady Northern Feng. Lady Northern Feng smiled and pointed at her maid, Granny Tao. She asked old Mrs. Gu, my lady, how would you feel if I let Granny Tao search Feng Qi? Old Mrs. Gu only wanted to make the whole thing go away as soon as possible so that she could move on to the next plan. She said, sure. Go ahead. Granny Tao walked up to Feng Qi and smiled faintly. Sorry about this, Miss Feng Qi. Feng Qi spread her arms and said, just get it over with. I'm starving. Yes, Granny Tao said calmly. Just like Granny Zhu did with Feng Wu, she started from Feng Qi's hair. Old Mrs. Gu didn't like it and felt that Lady Northern Feng was deliberately mimicking her. And she was right. Granny Tao was indeed mimicking Granny Zhu. Granny Tao had been with Lady Northern Feng for a very long time, and naturally she liked Feng Wu. Moreover, with her experience in the Imperial Palace, she would never be intimidated by the Gu family. Therefore, she took her time and searched Feng Qi for 15 minutes. Feng Qi was so angry that her face turned red. She would have lost her temper if she was being searched by another person. However, Granny Tao was from Northern Feng Mansion, and Lady Northern Feng was known for being unrelenting. Recalling how Tao Qingqing had been scolded by Lady Northern Feng, Feng Qi didn't dare make a sound. Lady Gu was frustrated as well. In the end, she couldn't help but say, my lady, I think that's long enough, isn't it? Lady Northern Feng glanced at Granny Tao. Granny Tao nodded. Lady Gu let out a breath of relief. I knew that nothing would be found on her. Xiao Qi is a good girl. How could she steal anything? What a waste of time. She even teased Granny Tao a little. Old Mrs. Gu was relieved as well. Maybe someone took the bracelet away. Let's broaden the search. Granny Zhu nodded and was about to leave. That won't be necessary. Granny Tao looked up at the old lady. Old Mrs. Gu suddenly had a bad feeling. She was right. Granny Tao raised Feng Qi's right hand, and a bracelet dropped out of her sleeve. Granny Tao caught it and said, I frisked Miss Feng Qi for so long because I wanted to make sure that she didn't have anything else on her. Chapter 2347 Untitled. Chapter 2347 Untitled. That was to say, she had found the bracelet at the very beginning, but had kept her silence and went on searching for other things. Lady Gu was dumbfounded. So was old Mrs. Gu. Feng Qi was perplexed at first, but she soon denied it. How can I have it? It's impossible. I didn't take it. Granny Tao stared at Granny Zhu and asked, Did you watch me the whole time when I searched Miss Feng Qi? Granny Zhu said, Yes. Granny Tao then looked at Feng Qi. Then what does Miss Feng Qi mean? Are you saying that I framed you? No, I'm not. But I didn't take the bracelet. Feng Qi grabbed her mother's hand and burst into tears. Mother! It wasn't me. I'm not the thief. Of course, Lady Gu knew that. Moreover, they were supposed to find the bracelet on Feng Wu. Because she was the one who put it in Feng Wu's sleeve. How did Feng Qi end up with it? Feng Qi was scared out of her wits. Shouldn't it be in Feng Wu's sleeve? Why do I have it? It's you. You put it there and set me up, didn't you? Feng Qi glared at Feng Wu. However, Feng Wu only shrugged. My dear cousin, can you tell me why you know that I was supposed to have the bracelet, and why I would want to frame you? Feng Qi scratched her head in a fluster, but she didn't have any proof. And Lady Gu knew that as well. She and old Mrs. Gu looked at each other, and both were frustrated. They had thought that the 3 plans would be enough to take Feng Wu down, but none of them worked in the end. That girl was unbelievable. Knowing that they had failed, old Mrs. Gu glanced at Feng Qi and said, You naughty girl. You could have told me that you liked the bracelet and I would have let you play with it. Taking it like that will make people mistake you for a thief. She then scolded Lady Gu. At her age, you need to be more strict with her. What if she starts taking other people's things back home? The old lady had been talking about catching the thief, but she tried to downplay it now that the bracelet was found on Feng Qi. Old Mrs. Long frowned. She didn't say anything, but that didn't mean that she didn't know what was going on. It was very petty of old Mrs. Gu to behave like this. Feng Wu, who had kept her silence until then, asked curiously, "Is that bracelet really the one you lost?" Old Mrs. Gu wanted to say that it wasn't, but everyone had heard what she said earlier, and she couldn't admit that she had been lying to all of them. She could only nod and say, "Yes, that's the one. She's such a careless girl." While her grandmother and mother wanted her to admit that she had taken the bracelet, Feng Qi didn't want to do that. She didn't want to be seen as a thief, because she hadn't done it. She grabbed the bracelet and shouted, "I told you already! I didn't take it. I don't know why I have it." Crack. Chapter 2348 Untitled. Chapter 2348 Untitled. Whoosh! Everyone looked at her right hand. Because Feng Qi had just crushed the bracelet in her hand. The bracelet had shattered into pieces. How could that happen? Didn't the old Mrs. Gu say that it was a family heirloom? Isn't it supposed to have a storage space inside? Something like that shouldn't be broken that easily. And if that bracelet is broken, the stuff inside should fall out. Didn't old Mrs. Gu say that it contains a secret skill? Where is it now? Chaoga watched in disbelief. Gosh! What did that mean? Xiao Wu, who's lying now? Chaoga was confused. Old Mrs. Gu said that the bracelet we found on Feng Qi was the one she lost. She also said that it was a family heirloom, hence all the fuss. But Feng Qi just crushed it with her bare hand. That's enough to prove that it's a fake bracelet. I'm so confused. Xiao Wu, is the old lady lying? Chaoga was genuinely confused. Feng Wu had to fight very hard to stop herself from cracking up. She glanced at old Mrs. Gu. The old lady looked very embarrassed. If Chaoga could see it, so could everyone else. Old Mrs. Long was very disappointed. She decided that old Mrs. Gu had become a dotard and couldn't be trusted anymore. Mrs. Zhua sighed inwardly. The players on her side were simply too stupid. What could she do? In the end, she still needed to find a way out for old Mrs. Gu. My lady, do you usually wear a fake one at home when you walk around? Mrs. Zhua reacted quickly and gave the old lady a hint. Old Mrs. Gu was too angry to understand it. But Mrs. Gu did. Although she didn't like it, she still had to make up an excuse for her mother-in-law. She said, "That's right. That dragon phoenix bracelet is too precious to be carried around, so I made a duplicate for her to wear on a daily basis. The two are almost identical. It's my mother-in-law's birthday today, so I'm sure that she was going to wear the genuine one. I guess she mixed up the two pieces and wore the duplicate instead." That explanation successfully saved the old lady. It made sense that the old lady wouldn't want to destroy the real piece accidentally. Feng Wu couldn't help but glance at Mrs. Gu. Mrs. Gu smiled at Feng Qi. If Xiao Qi hadn't destroyed it, we would never have known that it wasn't the genuine one. Well, it's getting late. After that, Mrs. Gu wanted to say that it was time to end the banquet. Chapter 2349 Untitled. Chapter 2349 Untitled. However, old Mrs. Gu didn't realize what her daughter-in-law was trying to do. She smiled and said, "There's no rush. Please get some rest. We have a great banquet for you tonight." Chaoga's eyes widened. Seriously? The old lady was so stubborn. Had it not been for Mrs. Gu, the old lady would have been utterly humiliated. However, she still wouldn't give up. Chowga looked at Feng Wu, who shrugged at her. Old Mrs. Gu smiled at Feng Wu and rubbed her hair when she walked past her. Xiao Wu, you haven't been here for quite some time, and I see that you're not as familiar with us as before. You'll get used to it after you stay here for a few days. It was Feng Qi's fault just then, and she almost incriminated you. As her older cousin, you should talk to her more often. I'll be much more reassured if the two of you can get along well. After that, she left with Granny Zhu. The crowd scattered as well, and Chowga was the only one who looked like she had just been struck by lightning. She had gone very stiff. She only let out her breath when they were shown to their own room. OMG! Chowga let out a breath of relief. I can't believe how shameless that old woman is. She just won't be defeated. Chowga sat down and started complaining. I can't stand her little speech. She actually asked you to stay here for a few days, as if you haven't run into enough danger here. And she said that you and Feng Qi should get along with each other. Doesn't she know how many grudges you have against each other? Chowga moved her chair closer to Feng Wu and said, Xiao Wu, I just don't get it. Feng Wu said, What? Chowga said, It's so obvious that the old lady is trying to kill you, and so is Lady Gu. Lady Wang is probably on their side as well. Mrs. Dugu and Mrs. Zhuo are up to no good either. This place is so evil. Can't we leave now? Feng Wu chuckled. Why? Chowga said, Because. Feng Wu said, Did I lose the first round back there? Chowga shook her head. It had been very dangerous, but as it turned out, that spiritual fossil stone had been found on Tao Qingqing. With so many people in the room, word would get out eventually, and Tao Qingqing's reputation. Tao Qingqing called you frivolous, but she was caught with that stone. That's karma, said Chowga. Feng Wu said, Karma had nothing to do with it. Chowga said, What do you mean? Feng Wu said, It was me. Chowga had speculated that Feng Wu had done something. She burst out laughing after Feng Wu admitted it. I knew that it couldn't be just a coincidence. Xiao Wu, you're wicked. You put the bracelet on Feng Qi as well, didn't you? Feng Wu said, That's right. I was worried that the old lady wouldn't admit it, so I crushed the bracelet beforehand, but I made it look fine on the outside. Chapter 2350 Untitled. Chapter 2350 Untitled. Chowga said, Given Feng Qi's bad temper, she can never stand it when she's wrong. So, she tightened her grip and the bracelet cracked. You really were involved in everything, weren't you? Chowga patted Feng Wu's shoulder. You're brilliant. Chuling came in with some tea. Chowga finally stopped laughing and asked Feng Wu, What do you think their next move will be? They were outnumbered here, so they had better be careful. Feng Wu shook her head. I have no idea. Chowga asked, What? Are we not leaving? Feng Wu said, The Gu family won't be able to stop me if I want to go, but I actually want to stay. Chowga asked, Why? Feng Wu said, If we leave now, the best we can do is humiliate old Mrs. Gu a little. For a shameless person like her, it's nothing. In that case, all my efforts will go to waste. Chowga said, So, you're saying. Feng Wu said, I have something bigger in mind. Chowga was perplexed. Feng Wu said, Lord Gu is forcing my mother to marry him. For that, he should be killed. Old Mrs. Gu tried to set me up, and I can't let her live. Lady Gu is one of the main culprits, and I won't forgive her either. Many people in the Gu family should disappear forever. Feng Wu smiled at Chowga. This is too good an opportunity to waste. What? Chowga couldn't believe her ears. Did you just say that you're going to destroy the entire Gu family? Chowga raised her voice. Do you want everyone to hear you? Feng Wu rolled her eyes at her. Chowga immediately covered her mouth, but there was still a look of disbelief in her eyes. Chuling couldn't believe it either. She had always known Feng Wu was very smart, but she had never expected her to try and take down the entire Gu family. Feng Wu shrugged. Lady Gu is creating too much trouble, and the Gu family has her back. If that family is gone, she'll be much easier to deal with. Chowga said, I know that, but it's the Gu family we're talking about here. They're one of the 10 major clans. How are you supposed to bring them down? Even Chowga was intimidated by the idea. Xiao Wu, how about we slow down a little? Feng Wu shook her head. As far as I know, the Gu family has already formed an alliance with the Zhou family. If I let it happen, things will turn against me. I have to get rid of the Gu family now. Feng Wu had gotten the information from Xian Yi when she went to the intelligence department earlier. Chowga said, Then what are you going to do? Feng Wu chuckled. It may seem difficult, but with the right method, it can be quite easy. Chowga said, I don't understand. Feng Wu clenched her fist. What would happen next was going to be very exciting. She looked forward to that night. After dinner, there was a knock on the door. They're here. Chowga looked like a cat with its hackles raised. Feng Wu patted her shoulder. It hasn't started yet. Calm down and answer the door. Chapter 2351 Untitled. Chapter 2351 Untitled. The door opened. As it turned out, it was 12. She was the girl Gu Shuyi had scolded earlier, and Gong Sun Qing had taken pity on her. Right now, Gong Sun Qing was with her as well. Xiao Wu. Gong Sun Qing was about to speak, when Feng Wu shushed her with a gesture. Gong Sun Qing looked inside and saw that Qiuling was cultivating. Feng Wu said, Qiuling is cultivating. Let's not disturb her. We can talk outside. Gong Sun Qing nodded. Of course. When they were outside, Feng Wu asked, What can I do for you? Gong Sun Qing smiled bitterly. It's still about 12. Xiao Wu, I know that cultivation is a private thing and that each person has their own method, but I feel really sorry for 12. Seeing 12 slowly walk away, Gong Sun Qing and Feng Wu followed her. They chatted as they walked. Gong Sun Qing looked at the tiny figure in front of them before she said to Feng Wu, Do you know why I care so much about her? Feng Wu asked why. Gong Sun Qing said, Her mother died while saving me, which is a story probably too long for you to listen to. In one word, I owe her my life. She then looked into Feng Wu's eyes and said, I can give her everything from weapons to resources, but you're the only one who can do something about her condition. Xiao Wu, can you help her? Just name your terms and I'll. Before she could finish, they heard a splash. Both Feng Wu and Gong Sun Qing turned around. They saw 12 in the river, and she was struggling. Help me! An invisible current seemed to carry her downstream. Gong Sun Qing ran after 12 without hesitation. Thump! Gong Sun Qing jumped into the water. She had thought that she could easily get 12 out, but when she got to her, she felt an invisible hand dragging them down. Both she and 12 were in danger. Help! Seeing Gong Sun Qing bobbing up and down in the water, Feng Wu shook her head and jumped into the water. Gong Sun Qing was still a Year 1 student and couldn't do anything about the undercurrent, but Feng Wu was already a spiritual lord, which was quite rare in the Junwu Empire. Feng Wu grabbed one person in each hand and jumped out of the water. Gong Sun Qing coughed violently. Luckily, Feng Wu got her out before she drowned. Are you all right? Feng Wu asked. Gong Sun Qing said, I'm fine. How is 12? It was the middle of winter and it was freezing outside. She's barely breathing. I need to treat her first. Feng Wu shook her head. I need somewhere warm. We can't stay here. She'll freeze to death. Look, there's a house. Gong Sun Qing pointed at a cabin a few hundred meters away in the woods. There's light inside. Someone should be living there. We can get some hot water. She then turned to Feng Wu. There's no kitchen in your courtyard, so hot water will be hard to get. Plus, we're a long way from there. Let's go. Feng Wu picked up 12 and headed for the cabin. She knocked on the door, but no one answered. Gong Sun Qing said, "We can't afford to wait. Let's smash the door open." Feng Wu nodded. Since she was carrying 12, she let Gong Sun Qing do the job. Thump! Gong Sun Qing pounded on the door. It wasn't tightly locked, and she easily smashed the door open. Huh! Gong Sun Qing looked around and was confused. The lights are on, but there's no one here. What's going on? Suddenly, a shadow pounced at her. The lights all went off. The room became pitch dark. Feng Wu heard Gong Sun Qing cry out in horror before everything went silent. As for Feng Wu, she was attacked at the same time. Level 9 Spiritual Lords. Feng Wu smiled a little. She had thought that Lord Mu would send a spiritual king after her, but they were only spiritual lords. What she didn't know was that someone had set a rule beforehand, forbidding any spiritual king to take part. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been just spiritual lords. Feng Wu pretended to be knocked out and fell to the ground. The two level 9 spiritual lords looked at each other in resignation. Why was their enemy so weak? Chapter 2352 Untitled. Chapter 2352 Untitled. Feng Wu closed her eyes. If she struck now, she could take down both spiritual lords. Because when she fought Elder Grain earlier, her sudden burst of energy had enabled her to fight like a level 1 spiritual king. Therefore, she was capable of defeating both spiritual lords if she could catch them off guard. But she didn't do that. She had to pretend to be unconscious if she wanted to find out what Lord Mu was up to. The two spiritual lords ignored Gong Sun Qing and 12, who were lying unconscious on the ground. Feng Wu was their real target. One of the spiritual lords threw Feng Wu over his shoulder, and the other led the way. They zigzagged through the garden before they jumped into a low building through the window. "Can we just put her here?" one of them asked. The other one said, "That's what we were told to do. Let's get out of here." They turned around and were about to jump out the window. But Feng Wu struck at that moment. Ground control. Fire Dragon Rod. Thump, thump, thump. It worked perfectly. The two men wouldn't have lost so easily if they had fought Feng Wu in a normal battle. But they didn't expect Feng Wu to wake up, let alone fight back. And the information they received said that she was only a level 7 spiritual lord. They were both level 9 spiritual lords and didn't think that they should take precautions against a level 7 spiritual lord. Therefore, they let their guard down. Ground control could keep someone within a circle. And the fire dragon rod was inescapable. Feng Wu moved as fast as a streak of lightning. Although the only light was from the moon outside, it didn't stop Feng Wu from striking out. The two level 9 spiritual lords panicked when they were attacked. They were completely under Feng Wu's control. And Feng Wu made good use of this opportunity. She froze the two men with ground control and struck out before they realized what was happening. Until they fell to the ground. The two men still didn't know what had hit them. Feng Wu didn't kill them right away. For one, level 9 spiritual lords weren't that easy to kill. For another, she still needed them as future witnesses. After knocking them out, Feng Wu finally had time to look around the room. It was a small building, and she could see the reflection of a pond outside. The place was well hidden. She knew that these people had brought her here for a reason. She quickly searched the entire building. She saw a lump on the ground. It was a person. She walked closer to see the person's face. And she was shocked. That was because those people had paid a high price to set her up. The person lying on the ground was none other than Mrs. Gu, Lord Gu's wife, the daughter of the Long family. Chapter 2353 Untitled. Chapter 2353, Untitled. The Long family was also one of the 10 major clans, and old Mrs. Long was a guest here as well. Mrs. Gu was lying on the ground, and she had been stabbed in the stomach. Feng Wu didn't know what to say. She put a finger under Mrs. Gu's nose and her eyes widened. The lady wasn't breathing anymore. She was dead. This shouldn't have happened. Feng Wu remembered that Mrs. Gu had saved old Mrs. Gu from embarrassment earlier in the day. The old lady should like her. If this was old Mrs. Gu's play, Mrs. Gu shouldn't have been killed. Was there someone else behind this? Feng Wu was perplexed. She then realized that someone was trying to frame her for Mrs. Gu's murder. In that case. Shortly afterward, she heard footsteps outside. There were quite a few people. She frowned and lay down next to Mrs. Gu, pretending to have fainted. The door opened. Someone walked in and closed the door. Feng Wu could feel the person looking her up and down. In order not to alarm the person, Feng Wu slowed down her breathing and lay completely still. She felt a hand on her. It moved down from her forehead to her cheeks. She didn't like the touch at all. She couldn't stand it for much longer. Luckily, the hand stopped before she lost control. The man then murmured, "Feng Wu, you had it coming. After this, you have to marry me." That was such a familiar voice. Hearing the man drink something, Feng Wu opened her eyes a little and saw the face in the moonlight. It was Jun Linshan. Was he the person who was setting her up? What was he drinking? It didn't smell right. Moreover, why did he say that she had to marry him this time? Feng Wu's face darkened. Meanwhile, the 2 level 9 spiritual lords had woken up. They had been tied up, gagged, and hidden behind the bed. They now felt that their master was going to be in trouble. Because this girl was much more capable than a level 7 spiritual lord. And she had made a lot of preparations. Jun Linshan was enjoying his role so much that the 2 level 9 spiritual lords felt utterly embarrassed. The prince was even talking to himself. He said, "Now I have to make sure that I've covered every angle." He ripped a piece of cloth off Mrs. Gu's clothes, stuffed it in Feng Wu's hand and murmured, "Xiao Wu, when you wake up, you'll see that your world has changed completely." He sat down, took Feng Wu's hand and went on, "How will it change? Let me tell you." Chapter 2354, Untitled. Chapter 2354, Untitled. If you find this world a kind place, when you wake up again, you'll see that everything has turned against you, said Jun Linshan. Feng Wu was screaming in her head, "Let go of my hand." Thinking that Feng Wu was unconscious, Jun Linshan happily told her everything. "I didn't want to target you, but you're on Jun Linyuan's side, which makes you my enemy." He suddenly chuckled. "When you wake up, you'll already be my woman. Once you've lost your virginity, my proud brother will never have you. He'll be the first who'll want to kill you." The more he spoke, the happier he became. "What are you going to do then? Everyone will be your enemy, and I'll be the only one who's on your side. You'll have to choose me." Jun Linshan gloated and rubbed Feng Wu's head. "Soon, you'll be mine." Behind the bed, the 2 men looked at each other in despair. They were both Jun Linshan's secret guards. They wished that they were unconscious. They wouldn't feel so embarrassed if they hadn't seen what Feng Wu had done. Therefore, they listened to Jun Linshan in utter frustration. They wanted to warn their master, telling him that Feng Wu could easily outsmart him. But they couldn't make a sound. Feng Wu had tied them up and constrained them so that they couldn't move a muscle. She had also put walnuts in their mouths, and it made their tongues go numb. Jun Linshan had no idea that his 2 men were worried about him, and was complaining that they had forgotten to put the piece of cloth in Feng Wu's hand. If he had known what Feng Wu had done before he arrived, he would be running for his life now. He touched his face and felt himself turn hotter. He then reached out for Feng Wu and frowned. She's wearing a lot of clothes. Those two men didn't do their job properly. I told them to take off her clothes. The two men listened in resignation behind the bed. They heard footsteps outside at that moment. The door was pushed open. Before the prince realized it, someone screamed. Feng Wu has killed Mrs. Gu! Feng Wu didn't know what to say. These people were horrible actors. They started shouting before they could see what was going on inside. The two men behind the bed looked at each other, and both despaired. It was so frustrating to see their master make a fool of himself. Lady Gu and Mrs. Zhou charged in first, followed by Lady Wang. Oh my God! Lady Gu ran to Mrs. Gu's side, knocking over tables and chairs on her way. Chapter 2355, Untitled. Chapter 2355, Untitled. Sister-in-law, are you all right? Mrs. Zhou said, turn on the light. We need to see what happened. Feng Wu thought, if you don't know what happened, why did you say that I killed Mrs. Gu? Are you a clairvoyant? Soon, the candles were lit. Seeing Mrs. Gu lying in a pool of blood with her stomach stabbed, Lady Gu screamed, "Oh my God!" She turned around and met Feng Wu's gaze. It felt like she had seen through everything. Lady Gu's stomach lurched. According to the original plan, Feng Wu should be lying unconscious on the ground. Now, however, she looked like someone enjoying a show. Lady Gu suddenly felt like a monkey in the circus. Why was this happening? It wasn't supposed to be like this. After the initial shock, Lady Gu shouted, "Feng Wu! You're a murderer! You killed Mrs. Gu!" Her face was twisted. If one looked closely, they could see the hatred and satisfaction in her eyes. "Feng Wu, what did Mrs. Gu ever do to you? Why did you kill her? You're going to pay for this." Mrs. Zhou opened her eyes wide and seemed to be in shock. She rubbed her forehead and sighed. "Feng Wu, how can you do this? You really are in a lot of trouble this time." Because Lady Gu had shouted loudly that Feng Wu had killed Mrs. Gu, more people kept gathering around. "What's going on? I heard you shouting from far away." Lady Wang arrived in a hurry. And many more people followed. Old Mrs. Long Mrs. Tao Ching, and even old Mrs. Gu arrived after her. Soon, people filled the room. After word got around, all hell broke loose in the manor. Soon, half the imperial capital learned that Feng Wu had killed Mrs. Gu. It would never have spread so fast if someone hadn't done it on purpose. Of course, it was still known around the more prestigious families. For instance, Emperor Wu received the news almost right away. He was having dinner with consort Ranmil when Qingqiao came in to tell them the news. "What?" Emperor Wu almost dropped his chopsticks. He stared at Qingqiao and asked, "What did you just say?" Qingqiao was Ranmil's maid, so naturally, they loved to hear such news. However, she couldn't let it show in front of Emperor Wu. Qingqiao fought back her excitement and spoke in a reverent tone. "Your Majesty, I have news from Her Majesty the Empress. It said that Feng Wu killed Lord Gu's wife." "From Her Majesty? Did she say why?" asked the Emperor. Chapter 2356, Untitled. Chapter 2356, Untitled. No. Emperor Wu rubbed his forehead. The news was too big to be fake, but it was Mrs. Gu they were talking about. Both the Gu and Long families were among the 10 major clans. Now that they were joined by marriage, even the emperor had to think twice before dealing with them. Luckily, Lord Gu was an obedient subordinate, and the Long family kept a low profile as well. Why would Feng Wu offend both families at once? She hasn't asked me for help yet. Why should I care about her? Thought Emperor Wu. On second thought, he realized that with how much Jun Linyuan cared about Feng Wu, he would never sit this one out. If he tried to defend the girl, he could damage the equilibrium among all the families. At that thought, Emperor Wu couldn't sit still anymore. He rose to his feet. He told Gao as he walked, "Send someone to the Gu family and see what's going on. Be discreet. Is that understood?" Gao knew that the emperor had to declare his attitude if the others knew that he was asking around. Therefore, he wanted to remain neutral until he found out what happened. As soon as Emperor Wu left, Ranmil almost jumped to her feet. She looked at Qin Chao in disbelief. "Is it true? Did Feng Wu really kill Mrs. Gu?" Qin Chao nodded. "I heard it from Kaiwan, the chief maid of Her Majesty the Empress. She said that Feng Wu is definitely going to die this time." Ranmil trembled in excitement. "Gosh! I thought I would never defeat Feng Wu, but there she goes. She's just ruined herself. This is my happiest day. Let's go." Ranmil headed for the door. Qin Chao asked, "Where are we going?" Ranmil said, "His Majesty must have gone to Empress Dugu. When Her Majesty the Empress Dowager hears about it, she'll want to see Empress Dugu as well. Let's go to Sinang Palace to see the old lady." She had never felt so happy since she arrived at the palace. It was like a sunny day that she had been waiting for ages. As expected, Empress Dugu and Emperor Wu were both at the Empress Dowager's palace. Even Princess Jun Wuxiao was there. They didn't mind Ranmil joining them. Kaiwan, Empress Dugu's chief maid, was telling the story. "Mrs. Gu is dead, and the killer is the famous Feng Wu. Lord Gu's manor is in a mess at the moment, and everyone is asking for more information." Gao, the eunuch, had gone to the manor, and would send back information if he found any, but Emperor Wu was still anxious. Why did Feng Wu kill Mrs. Gu? Emperor Wu couldn't understand it. Kaiwan said, "I heard that Mrs. Gu walked in when Miss Feng Wu was with another man." "So, what?" Emperor Wu jumped to his feet. Meanwhile, the Gu manor was in a mess. All the ladies and their daughters had gathered around. Old Mrs. Long saw her daughter lying in a pool of blood and the open wound on her stomach. When she heard Lady Gu say that Mrs. Gu was dead, she immediately passed out. That started a new round of panic. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.